Hey, thanks for listening to our podcast. If you want to listen live in the central Indiana area, you can hear us on 93.5 FM and 107.5 FM. Rick Venturi, Andy Moore, Automotive Group Hotline. We're going to go at length with the former coach on a lot of things. Let me go ahead and put this out here, and I'm going to turn you loose, okay?
Okay.
I know everybody around here, and I know it's early. And people tell me stuff I already know, right? So I know it's early. And a lot of people, Rick, are, you know what, they played well, and I'm excited about it. I cannot get past the fact that they gave that away yesterday, and there is not enough margin for error to give games away like that. I can't get past it. Go ahead.
No, there's no question about it. And every one that you let get away, and you really don't get back. I think this was a really disappointing loss to me. I don't look for the moral victory because there aren't any. It wasn't disappointing, John, in the fact that we could go and lose an opener to a good team. I mean, they're a good team with a good quarterback. Although I think that they were ripe. I think it was the perfect situation to catch them in. I prophesized that the offensive line for San Diego was bad, and they are bad. I mean, that was, despite the poor defensive performance, there still were like 4 sacks and one taken off. But I think I was disappointed really in how it happened. I mean, we have great effort, we have resilience, but that's kind of part of your contract. That effort, I never want to overplay that because that is to assume that somebody else doesn't have effort. Everybody basically plays hard on Sunday. Sometimes it changes a little bit at the end of the season, but right now everybody's playing really hard. I think the thing that disappointed me the most, and I will break down all 3 segments for you unfiltered, is how we lost it. I thought that what we all worried about going in, including myself, was how would we respond on offense? How would Frank, handle this? How would Jacoby handle it? How would we go on? Well, I give the offense plus grades all the way across. I thought, and I'll get into that in detail, but I thought that was a real plus. And the very thing that we worried about to me was most effective. I mean, most effective. Started out a little slow, but did all the things they had to do. And I think that's the good news going forward. I think the good news going forward is we're going to overcome the loss of luck. We're going to be just fine on offense. We're going to be different. We're going to be different. Like I forecasted that before the game. We're not going to look like, other Colt teams, but we're going to be fine on offense. Biggest disappointment to me was, the other 2 areas. I mean, the special teams, which we basically just consider that a win going in. I mean, we've done that for a long, long time. We've considered a win. That was a terrible meltdown from, penalties to Vinny just having an awful day, really in many respects accounting either giving up or missing out on 14 points in a really close game. And, that was a really mistake-ridden game, special teams-wise, from the opening kickoff that was run back to the 40, much less the penalties, the blocked kicks, and the misses. That was, we just didn't expect that. And then, I really thought our defense was a huge disappointment. It was a disappointment because, the expectations were so high. We're going to take the next step this year. And, I think it was a little bit lost because of the luck thing going into that game. I had said about a ton of times that, we're going to be looking at a whole different type of offense, and we're going to be looking at different quarterbacks, different concepts, and it was going to be really important that we made some evolutions, that we would not be able to play like we did a year ago and be nearly as good. If anything, we would regress. Well, the reality of it is, if you get through all of it, this was exactly we played yesterday on defense exactly like we played against the Chiefs. Two really good football teams, that we played in the last 2 weeks. Now, here are the numbers for anybody that wants to know, for anybody that wants to sugarcoat this, because I'm not going to, because I think it's unacceptable. and I think you have to do something about it because I think the talent is there. In the last two games against the Chiefs, obviously in the playoffs with a good quarterback and a really good coach, obviously against the Chargers, same thing, good quarterback, good coach. We've given up in two games 61 points, 916 yards, 611 passing, and a 70% completion average, 7 out of 10, and 305 yards rushing at 5.75. Yesterday, add to that 7 for 11, 64% on third down. So, what that tells me is, we've had all winter to work on that, and obviously we haven't made the necessary changes. I think in Tennessee, I think they come back to us a little bit. I think they're the kind of team that plays into this. But, we don't stop. When a good, tough running team gets right at us, they knock the hell out of us when they had to. And our underneath coverage is just non-existent like it was last year. So, to me, the disappointing things, of course, were things that we went in very optimistic about, special teams and defense. But in reality, the best part of the game was the offense. And I thought the quarterback played well.
It's Rick Venturi on the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline. I know what parts, and I documented that and talked about a little bit earlier, that kind of disappointed me defensively. Where do you start with your level of disappointment? Because at best, it was a clunky effort. At worst, I mean, it just wasn't ready for prime time, it looked at times. What did you think about it all?
Yeah, I think I'm going to just quote Anthony Walker. Anthony Walker was totally unfiltered after the game, and he didn't spin it. Everybody will spin it, and they'll talk about the sacks and create that's a good game. But Anthony didn't spin it at all. He was unfiltered. He just said, we just got our butts kicked. And they did, but this is a reoccurring theme against good offenses. I mean, a year ago, we were 31st in the league in pass percentage and at 70%, and we're right back there again, Sunday. Actually, Rivers was 73.4, 333 yards passing, 3 TDs, 121. And then to add insult to injury, you got two backs go in there and get 125 yards rushing, 6.0. So, other than rush the passer in certain situations, really there's nothing there. I mean, they were, like I said, when they had to run the ball, they really did. They totally wiped our underneath coverage out with passes over the middle, play actions, had guys wide open. We're that zone team all the time. We have very little matchup, very little man-to-man, and so, these good teams understand that they can create openings in that zone and in those different zones, different variations. And if you don't knock the quarterback down, we just don't. We have no answers on how to stop them, and that's really discouraging. Like I said, I'm watching Tennessee getting ready for next week, and I forgot that we played 6 quarters out of 8 against Blaine Gabbert last year,
right?
In November, December, and then all of a sudden you look at us against the Bradys and Darnolds and even the Raiders, and then you look at us against the Chiefs, and then you look at us, now.
And that's a problem with this schedule this year too, because you don't get the break that you got a year ago. Yeah, no Derek Anderson. So
my thought is that you basically have everybody back, plus you've added the Houstons. You added Houston as a guy. You thought Toure, and when it comes to rushing the passer, I think we are going to be better there. With the exception of Yassine, everybody's back in the secondary. The linebackers are back, but they just they did the same thing the Chiefs did. They motion across the ball, and they force Leonard to be the middle linebacker. He had his second bad game in a row. I'm sorry. I mean, I know he's a folk hero here, but, he got pounded on the running game, and they come right at us, and they kind of create a new strength over there. And so, we got a lot of improvement to do. And now I think a team like Tennessee, who doesn't throw the ball nearly as well, is a much better matchup for us this week. But, again, it's two things. It's that underneath coverage that just doesn't seem to be able to match up on anybody, doesn't lock up on anybody. And so you've got a lot of cracks, a lot of creases. The screen game kills us because we're in that soft drop-off zone, and then they catch it and run. And I'll tell you this week, the one thing you better do is you better get up on Henry and Dion Lewis. I mean, you better get up on those guys. If you let them have a head of steam, they'll run through you and around you. So, we have to clean that up in the week. But, if you just ask me the two things, number one is underneath coverage is non-existent. And then number two, it just seems like when the good teams want to run it, they do run it.
All right, I'm going to take a break and then come back with Rick Venturi. And I want you to think about this. I want you to double back, if you wouldn't mind, and get to Darius Leonard, because I have heard from a number of people. You mentioned that he got hammered. I know that wasn't your word, but mine. And and that was the case yesterday a number of times. People are asking me a lot about his weight, and might he be too light? Can he be pushed around? Are they focusing in on his weight to try to use that aspect against him? Those are questions asked to me, and I will pose those to you on the other side. Is that cool?
Got it.
Rick on the other side. Most important segment you hear every week is Right Now. We'll take some calls coming up a little bit later on. Rick Venturi rejoins us next. Yeah, back with Rick Venturi. We'll do some calls if you want it a little bit later at 239-1070. Andy Moore, Automotive Group Hotline. You mentioned Darius Leonard the past two games, going back to Arrowhead in January to this one yesterday out in Southern California, and not playing up to what he should, even as a rookie at the end of the year last year and now a second-year player. Is any of this have to do with his level of weight? Because a lot of people are asking me that, and I want to put that question to you.
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. The issues that he had were there a year ago. He is a terrific range football player. He can go from sideline to sidelines. He's one of the best loose play guys. He can strip it. He can intercept it. He can rush the passer. He is not a really tough kid not a tough kid, I'm not going to say that, but he's not a real physical guy in the foxhole. And that's a little bit what happens with the Tampa 2 scheme is you end up, and because when I was with New Orleans, we had to play the best team that's ever played it was sapping those guys, and we had to play them in Tampa all the time. So I know a little bit about it. And what you end up with if you're not careful is a bunch of guys that can run like hell, that can race and run, and that can penetrate. But teams start to figure that out, and they get in certain formations, certain movement, and they can make you very predictable in the bubble and come right after one linebacker. And if your nose isn't great, which I didn't think Hunt had one of his better games, then all of a sudden they get up on Leonard, and Leonard he becomes like the middle linebacker when they do that, and he's not the guy that's going to come downhill and beat blocks. I think this team is really good when they go. I'm going to make a subtle difference here. When they go to the ball, when everybody's going to the ball, guys are free, guys are running, that's one thing. But when they get you in that briar patch and come right after you, you have to go through people to the ball. Now, that's a lot different. You got to take people on. If you look at the last play of the game, if you look at the touchdown to Ekeler, and there's 3 or 4 like that in the course of the game, it just looked exactly like Kansas City. What they did with Damian Williams is, in the second half last year, is they just moved us around, ran right at us, and, got up on Leonard, got up on Walker, and boom. Now, when you put Okereke in there with Leonard, that's worse, because one thing about Walker is will get after you. Not the biggest guy in the world, but when you get Okereke, he's almost a carbon copy of Leonard. So now you're almost like playing with 2 safeties in there. So you got to be careful with that in that regard.
So Rick Venturi on the Andy Moore Automotive Group Hotline. What else did you see defensively before we hit a break, and then we'll come back on the other side with offense and Adam Vinatieri's situation recently?
Well, I think I really think we're talented enough on defense. I really do. We weren't ready. Whether it wasn't enough work in the preseason. Obviously, we didn't tackle. Tackling is a learned, and it's a body memory experience. It isn't something you can not do and then all of a sudden turn a switch on. We didn't tackle very good. We weren't in position a lot. But I just think we're going to have to really re-examine, how we cover people. I just feel very strongly about this, that when you get against the good passing teams. You've got to play man-to-man some more than we play. You've got to match up those zones really tight and choke people off. Otherwise, they just go up and down the field on you. That's where you get that 70% completion, which really, really matters. I think we are going to be better up front. I mean, I think you saw what Houston can do. You saw what Reich can do. I think we'll be okay there. I just think we're going to really have to tighten up and schematically be ready for these teams with a lot more what I call just choke-off coverage and not just sit there and hope.
So yesterday, would you think it was more talent, coaching? What did you have more of a problem with the lack of defense that you saw?
Well, I don't think it was a great plan against Rivers. I really don't. I mean, and it was the same way with Kansas City. I mean, like I said, you've got to be able to stop those runs. I think we didn't get the penetration that we did at other times. You didn't feel Autry quite as much as you normally do. But teams are going to move and they're going to run away from him. That's the new thing. But I just think the underneath coverage really is just either soft or, it's just not there at times. And then teams are smart enough to use play action, and then all of a sudden your zone coverage is distorted. So I think it's fixable. I mean, if there's good news, I think it's fixable. I had hoped that there would be more of an evolution from last year to this year.
That's Rick Venturi on the Andy Moore Automotive Group.
I will go to one thing, John.
Sure.
Is because you did ask me the question. I never understood the weight thing. I never did understand it because his problem, when Leonard, if he had any problems, even though he had a terrific year, it was never in the range and the speed and the quickness. His problem was always in the briar patch. His problem was always within the box when they were able to get formations where they came right at him. So I never understood why in the world that you would want to get smaller. If anything, to me, you would want to get more physical.
So Rick Venturi, other side, 5 o'clock hour. We'll get to your calls. We'll talk with him about Jacoby Brissett and also Adam Vinatieri, where we should be going into week 2 regarding that and the misses that were costly yesterday in that loss to the Chargers. Rick rejoins us coming up on the other side next. Welcome back. Rick Venturi, 5 o'clock hour. Calls coming up in a bit at 239-1070. Back the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline we go right now. And, Rick, we'll get to Adam Vinatieri coming up and your thoughts on that in a couple of minutes, and I'll give you mine, what I started out the show with. But all in all, I mean, Jacoby Brissett, I thought the offensive line did what was necessary. They gave this offense a running game, and I thought Jacoby looked incredibly comfortable.
I did, too. I was very impressed, and I couldn't. Just the opposite on offense. I thought that Frank and Sirianni and company and the whole group, I thought they did a really good job. They knew they had to adapt. I think they did have the advantage of going through an off season and all spring and all summer with Jacoby, so they had a pretty good idea what he was best at. But they did the things exactly like I had hoped they would. I think they were very methodical with him. They were careful, and I don't mean that negative. I think they were really sharp. They played, let him play within himself. They didn't ask him to do anything, and yet he made some. Like I always said, a quarterback can't manage. You can't just say he's going to manage the game. He had to make 2 really good plays on that last drive. He had to make that 20-yard throw to Hilton, and then he had to make that terrific back fade throw on that 4th down to Funchess. So those were really good plays. I thought Frank also really adapted within the game. He realized that all of a sudden we could pound them with our left side, and obviously the running game just went crazy in that second half. I mean, obviously Mack was tremendous. He had one of the days of his life, and most of it in the second half. And a lot of it was utilizing that left side, which I think, and I said this a year ago, and I wasn't sure, they hadn't been together, but boy, they put it together this week in that running game. And if you put Kelly and Nelson and Costanzo, and then and Jack Doyle being back is so important. But you put those 4 guys next to one another with Mack behind them, there is no better, I'm telling you, there's no better run-blocking combination in the National Football League, and it was proven out there. I mean, we just pounded him, and I thought Nelson was terrific. I mean, not only was he good at the point, which we always expect, but his pulls were outstanding. His traps, his counters back to the right side. I thought he was great. Jack was his normal good, and I thought Kelly was terrific. You don't notice Kelly, but what Kelly did all day was he cut Mebane off back to that open side. I said we had to run to the 5 technique, and we did. We motioned over there a lot. We brought Jack from the right to the left, and then we pounded right there, and it was really effective. I just thought those guys across the board there, and again, you can't say enough about Doyle blocking on that edge and then whamming back inside. And, of course, Mac, he had the patience. A couple times it was stuffed. He had enough patience and burst to get outside. He hammered it up in there when he had to and really, really changed the game. I mean, we were patient. We didn't panic. We made the throws when we had to. Matter of fact, that 9-minute drive, I was so worn out by the end of the game. I was, when you're sitting there and you're down 8 and you're just grinding and grinding. I mean, that takes cojones on its own.
I just thought ideally that's exactly offensively what they wanted out of that game.
No.
I mean, I thought it was perfect, and that's what makes losing the game in the fashion in which they did so devastating.
It was just perfect. And but on the drive now, remember this, because on that one series we get stalled, we get behind the 8 ball, we run a play that gets a loss, we get a screen for a loss, and Jacoby has to make that 20-yard completion, which we had great protection, and he made that 20-yard completion back to Hilton, which got it to a 4th and 2, and then he made that great fade back shoulder fade to Funchess out there on the left side. So I mean, it took a couple throws within that. But you're exactly right. We wound it down. I said going into the game that this will be a team that Indianapolis may not be used to, and that's what I envision. I envision that, but I can't say enough about that left side. I mean, those guys blocked those guys into submission, and like I said, and of course they're all number 1 draft picks, with the exception of Doyle, but he's the best kept secret in the league, and then Mac is a 4. But those 3 guys, Kelly and Nelson and Costanzo, they're just money. I would say the only thing coming out of there that it's not a concern, but I always give you a forecast. I think the biggest thing is I do think there's a little problem on our right side if we get into a game where we have to throw it 35 times. I think Lewinsky could struggle. Smith could struggle against really good people. We gave up 2 sacks on the right side. Now, this was a game that we didn't throw it very much, and we threw it in more ideal situations. I would say that, and, how will Jacoby be in a 35 game? But I really like the way he played. I thought he played in this game exactly like he did in that Cleveland preseason game. And Frank and those guys did a really good job. I mean, that play action was quick. Things were quick getting out there. Matter of fact, he smoked that one into Doyle. He was a little jacked up on that one. That was the only one he needed a little bit more touch. But no, I was really impressed with that operation. I mean, to struggle there early and then just keep banging away and have the patience even from behind. And to run it in on that 2-point, that's kind of amazing. But I do think that's a zone read. I think if they'd overclosed, I think he would have pulled it. I don't think that was necessarily a dead run. I think it was a run. But, we really did handle a pretty good front up there, and we'll obviously see another one this week in Tennessee. But, no, I was very impressed. I thought that the coaching staff offensively did a really good job, and I thought that Jacoby – more than step to the plate.
Yeah, all right. I don't know how many snaps he ended up getting here. I know that he had 3 targets, and then he had that drop in the end zone that should have been a touchdown had he held on. I guess yesterday wasn't that type of high-profile afternoon from Ebron. Are we likely going to see a lot of these this year like that?
That's interesting because he was, And actually, Jacoby threw a rope on that. I mean, that was a great throw in the end zone, and he double caught it.
He had it initially, and then for some reason, dropped it.
Yeah, and what's his name? The guy in the booth. I thought he explained it pretty well. I was mad. I thought it should have been a completion, but then the way he explained it, the 1 foot down and bobble going out of the end zone, I guess you couldn't argue with that on the technicality of it. But that was a great throw. But he was really not a part of that game plan. Now, I will say this: the loss of Funchess. In one way, you've got a guy that can replace him with more speed and more burst out on the field, and that's Deon Cain. Deon Cain has a lot more burst. He can get on top of you. The back fades now won't necessarily be thrown on a line. He'll have the defensive back deeper, and you'll actually just back fade it, and he'll come back to the ball. I do think Funchess' role was as I had defined it from the very beginning, and you saw it on that critical 4th and 2, is he was going to be the bank board guy on short yardage situations, 3rd and 3 to 5, and that obviously you put 4th and 2 in there. He was the guy that can run the slant, the fade, the back fade, and have the size in the red zone and the girth to do that. So losing him for a while, I do think you lose that. Now, what that means to me is now when you get in that red zone and in some of those situations, you create the matchup problem with Ebron, and Ebron's role probably skyrockets again. I think the one thing that, and it's a good problem, not a bad problem, but with Funchess and Cain and Campbell and Hilton and Jack and Mack, you need more than one ball. You know what I'm saying? But I do think that Ebron inevitably will have to be a much bigger part of the game than he was Sunday.
Do you expect Marlon Mack to get around 25 carries per game? Because therein lies another issue that maybe we'll look into further down the road. His durability has been the biggest question in his career so far. Do you think he's capable of that?
Yeah, it's been the only question, John. You're exactly right. He's proven everything else, from be able to run inside to pass protect. Everything that he had to learn, he has learned, and he has gone, and he has been the back even better than I thought he was going to be, and I thought he was going to be a good back. So, the question remains, the 16 Sundays, we won't know that until we go along. I think Frank would like to have him have that many carries. I think that's the team Frank would like to now have, is a very balanced team that threatens you to run, that then opens up the play action, that keeps defensive rushers on their heels, allows quick rhythm, and then eventually some shots. We didn't take a lot of shots, but look for Tennessee now. Tennessee gives you opportunities to take shots on early downs, particularly as well as we ran the ball Sunday. You're going to see Vaccaro and you're going to see Byard. You're going to see them nosing up to that line of scrimmage, and they don't have very good corners, so look for some shots over the top to Cain and Hilton this week on early downs. But I think that's exactly what he wants to be, is that balanced team. Avoid those 3rd and longs, keep that ball movement, ball control. It was about 50-50. Time of possession was no factor. And as you said, it was unfortunate because, to me, one only has to look at the overtime on the way that San Diego took the ball after that great drive to tie it up, and you think the momentum is in your court now. That normally when you go like that, on my years of experience, the momentum is in your court. And all you got to look at that series from beginning to end to go down and score by San Diego, and that's a microcosm of our problems versus good teams on defense. I just tell fans, just take that overtime and look at it, and you'll see underneath coverage, running the ball. You'll see all the things I talked about earlier.
And listen, this was no excuse, Bubby, me saying this, but this is what I thought going into overtime. They had just been out there defensively to try to, make sure that the Chargers didn't get into any field goal position. And once they lost that toss, I sat there and I thought, yep, this is not going to work. You watch. And it didn't work.
Well,
so, and that's on them. It's on them, and there's no doubt about it. But
4 plays, we had held the ball for 9 minutes. I mean, those guys had nothing, but they basically rested the fourth quarter. So, I won't buy that one.
That's the first thing I thought. I thought, man, they're going to go down the field.
You're coming from, but they had that 9 minutes.
No, and there's no excuse there. But I'm just telling you that's what the first thing I thought of right there. Hey, Zach Pascal was out there, and I think that surprised a lot of people. I don't know how many snaps he ended up getting, but he was running around out there. No targets for him, but he was being utilized in what capacity when he did get snaps?
Well, really hard to define, actually. Really hard to define. I just think he's an all-purpose guy. I think if somebody needs a blow, they can put him in there in any position. But in reality, other than the blocking aspect of it, the blocking aspect on the running game, which is a role that he's probably better than the majority of those guys, no question about that. But when it comes to throwing the ball, you don't want to take Hilton or Campbell or certainly Kane off the field.
So Rick Venturi with us. All right, a little bit earlier, I said this. I don't think had they won this game, we'd still, I think, be looking at Vinatieri's situation right now critically. But I think the fact that it ultimately cost them that game, you're even more critically looking at this, Rick. I don't think this is one where you just kind of lean back and you fold up your arms and say, hey, he's the GOAT. He's going to find a way out of it. I think that there's more to this than just missing some in bad spots at the start of the season yesterday. Do you, or am I overreacting?
Oh, I don't think you're overreacting. I hate it that it's coming out of my mouth, but I don't think you're overreacting at all. I go back to something. Mike Chappell, our friend Mike, does a great job before the season starts. He has a daily, like a daily writing column there, and in that daily blog, he takes one day and he goes through every position on the team, strengths, weaknesses, who's going to make it, who isn't, and it's really smartly written. And I remember the day, and I chronicled it, that he talked about special teams, and he talked about, obviously, Vinny being the GOAT, the greatest of all times, but he put a subtle caution light in there, in that if you really look at it from 2014 to 2018, there's been a slow decline in numbers. In other words, he was 96.8% in 14. He was down to 85.2 last year. So that's an 11% drop. And, we saw things, and maybe it's injury, maybe it's more than we know. We saw things in 18 and now 19 that we can't believe, that we scratch our head. How could you lose a game because Vinny missed 2 field goals and an extra point? I mean, that cannot happen. I mean, that's what you're saying to yourself. But, that did happen. It didn't necessarily cause a loss, but, there were misses last year that you scratched your head at, particularly at the end of the year. And so, there definitely is a reason for concern. I mean, he said it. I'm quoting him. I'm not saying it, but I'm quoting him. He said, if it was just a normal guy, you'd probably release it. If it was Parkey, he'd be gone.
There's no question. You've got a line of guys in here kicking today. If that happened to somebody else,
I just have too much. I have too much belief in the guy. Too much faith in the guy that I believe there's just too much fiber there that he'll somehow fix it. But to not be concerned at this stage is really not to look at the facts.
I completely agree with you on that. And again, I'm trying not to be overboard with this, this was a situation in which a guy that everybody, I think, kind of just thought, yeah, you know what, that's the least of the problems, now is at the forefront of the issues. And it cost him a game. I mean, that's one you're going to look back on and go, man, if they only had that back again, an extra point, a couple of field goals, boom, things are drastically different.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. I said my disappointment in the game was, not that we couldn't have lost to a good team. That was, on the road. That's not something that's devastating, but it's how you did it. Where we were all concerned with what our offense was going to look like, how Jacoby was going to be, how we were going to handle that, and that ended up being the best part. That ended up being the highlight of our team, and our special teams, which we just have taken for granted here, was a disaster, and our defense wasn't worth a damn.
No doubt about that. All right, anything else we haven't talked about that you kind of wanted to bring up besides it's in Tennessee in week 2, clearly?
Yeah, it's really on to Tennessee. Tennessee is, I could go in great detail. We're not going to have the time, but, they're a team that is got a really good defense. Although they have not played well, last year we killed them. I think 38 and 31 in 2 games. I mean, we had like 68 points. Hilton just killed them in the first game. Mac killed them in the second game. So we've torn them every way but loose, even though their numbers are really good. I mean, they were 3rd last year against the score. A great start for them. Held Cleveland to 13, got 43. Big, they're really good, what I call down the cylinder on defense. I mean, they've got Casey and Jones inside, 2 really good linebackers, Evans and Jatavius Brown that I like, 2 terrific safeties, and Byard and Vaccaro, and then a really good nickel in Ryans. I mean, they're good down the cylinder. But I think where they struggle now, there's an anomaly here because they're really good edge rushers, but they're not great edge run players. So I think you can run at their right. You had the young kid Landry, although he's a good rusher off the right side. But I think you can run. You can make some money on that edge right there and pound them right in there. I think you can kill their corners. I think their biggest weakness is especially you make them play nickel, get Ryans out of the corner, get Ryan inside, and then you go to work on Jackson and Butler. Jackson just can't handle Hilton, no way possible. And then when you run the ball, when you get to that edge on that right side, get everybody cracked and make that guy tackle, because he won't tackle. Jackson will not tackle. He refuses to tackle. And you can work on those guys all day. So they have vulnerabilities on that outside. And then on offense, they're run-driven. I mean, they have, if you look at Henry, and the strength of their team is Henry and Lewis, the 2 running backs, Thunder and Lightning, and Mariota when he's running the football. If you look at those 3 guys and you add and I put screens with the running game, to be honest with you. And if you look at those 3 guys, they produced almost 2,500 yards last year, the 3 of them either running or screen passing. So that's where it starts. I mean, down the middle, you got to stop those guys. You cannot let those guys beat you. I think they've got a little bit better receiving core this year. Davis is a year older. A.J. Brown, the kid from Mississippi, the draft pick, looked really good Sunday, really good after the catch. I think he had 111 yards. Humphrey they got from Tampa is an Edelman-type slot. But the key, the money guy you got to stop, particularly in the red zone, is Delaney Walker. He's back. Now, they have the same liability that San Diego has. Their offensive line is really not very good at all. We faced 2 of the worst offensive line. They had Luan, their left tackle, their blindside guy. He's suspended, so we go 2 weeks in a row without a top left tackle. And Kelly, who's filling in for him, just really struggled. He can't handle athleticism. Conklin on the right side, who was a number 1 pick, who they didn't pick up the 5th-year option, which tells you a lot right there. He can be collapsed all day because he's set soft, and then inside, they struggle. They went out and signed Roger Saffold, to a big contract. He was in St. Louis when I was there. He is really on the decline. He does not have the leg power. So, and then the other thing is that Mariota is still a college quarterback and probably always will be. If you saw his legs off on the edge and you cut his scramble legs, he's in the bottom 5 as a drop back passer. He just struggles as the drop back. He's indecisive. He gets frenetic at times. So you got to have a good plan for him. We did a year ago. We actually knocked him out. Remember, we got Gabbard for 6 quarters. But the thing with him is you have to collapse the pocket and don't give him escape edges to the edge. When he gets on the edge now, he is really dangerous throwing on the run. So you have to collapse him. We did a good job last year of really rushing but collapsing him, and then we got 2 big plays when we spied Leonard. We got an interception by Leonard and a sack. So, I mean, all those things you do. I think this is a team you got to get up and press those guys. Their receivers don't get a lot of separation, and you have to choke things off. You can't let those guys get going, and you particularly have to choke off those guys coming out of the backfield. I mean, the big guy, Henry, is one of the most deceptive guys in the league. I mean, he's not just a big banger. You saw him go 75 yesterday. He went 65 against us on a toss 2 years ago. He's deceptively fast. he's deceptively elusive. He does it with kind of a gliding action. It isn't real shake and bake, but he can make one guy miss by sliding. Got a great stiff arm. And then Dion Lewis comes in the game. He's the traditional old throwback third down back. He can catch a screen and go, draw. They're two different kind of guys. And, of course, Mariota's legs. So, again, you cut those three guys' legs and you take away Delaney Walker in that red zone, and then you knock the hell out of that offensive line.
Man, they look good across the board, and that Cleveland team, kind of like we talked about, didn't look ready for prime time, did they?
They that's the most overhyped outfit, and it's apparent today, but I thought so all along. It's the most overhyped outfit I've ever seen in my life, and obviously they got their wake-up call. Yeah,
and Jacksonville going to be out Foles for a while. Boy, you had 3 broken collarbones or fractured collarbones. I think Tyreek Hill got in that mix yesterday for Kansas City.
He is in that mix. That's exactly right. And, obviously those guys are going to miss a lot of times. That's not something you come back quick from in this game.
Yeah, Gardner Minshew is who's going to be under siege. And I remember you talking about him before the draft, too, out of Washington State, I believe. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. I think he was the leading passer in the league. He was a guy that I really liked once you got into that, that second tier. I'm not sure though that they want to play him for 15 Sundays. We'll see. We'll see about that. And, we talked about this in the pregame yesterday, you and I, and you brought it up. But I mean, Jacksonville can't help themselves. For a team that, you would think that with their head coach and with Tom Coughlin in charge, they would be a highly disciplined outfit like his
and
old
Miles Jack's not supposed to be that guy either.
Yeah. And yet they do these silly things that they keep self-destructing. So, it's very hard now, obviously, without Foles, to feel like they're going to be a real threat. We'll see Houston tonight. Obviously, I think they're in a bit of disarray. And Tennessee is solid. It just seems like the Colts really have their number. Hopefully that continues next week down in Nashville.
One quick thing: how is Antonio Brown going to look in a Patriots uniform?
Oh, he'll look good. He'll look good, and if he screws up, he'll have the first plane ticket out of Boston. But this is a classic Bill. You got to understand, Bill, and I don't think John wanted this to happen. I know he didn't. I think this got out of hand there. Personally, I think Miss Mayock mishandled it. Maybe they were playing good cop, bad cop. You don't call a hot-headed pro football player out in front of everybody. You just don't do that and expect to recover. Nothing good happens when you do that. I learned that over the year. You can be just as tough on a pro athlete as a college athlete, but you do it more quietly and you do it in your office, in the room. You don't do it in front of people. And I think they created a no-win situation. Now with Bill, and I've been with him, I've known him forever. What Bill is interested in, and he will take guys with problems. Obviously, Josh Gordon has a million problems. I mean, he's done this over the years. The number one thing with him is, do you have a great football work ethic on the field, and does the game really matter to you? Those are the two issues that are most important, because he feels that if you come to him, you're coming to him at the end of the road. Okay, there's no more road. So this is it. Plus, he has a way of life there that's different than most teams. You come in and you do it the Patriot way, and there is no compromise, or you'll be gone. Hainsworth was gone. I mean, he's taken some guys, they haven't worked out, and they're silently gone the next day. But he knows this, that there's nobody in history other than Antonio Brown that has had 6 straight years of over 1,000 yards. So, he's bringing another great player into the mix, and he's assuming that the Patriot way of life is enough that he will mold into it and play. And you know what? He doesn't lose anything, because if he doesn't, he will be gone.
That's Rick Venturi every Monday right here beginning at 4:30. It's all that you need to know about yesterday's game, about what went down, the future, then, of course, the matchup. Week 2 on the road in Nashville against the Titans coming up on Sunday afternoon via the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline. Always a pleasure, man. I knew you're going to bring it. You brought it. I appreciate it as always.
Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more. Call me a little bit more on Tennessee if you want specifics.
You got it. Thank you, Rick. Rick Venturi on the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline.